let's take a quick look at the first discussion board and talk about logical diagrams a little bit. It's the first one, so students tend to struggle with it a little bit. So I wanted to kind of look at it and kind of guide you through the process here real quick. The discussion board is really based on the network project. So even though it's a group assignment for the network project, there's an individual component to that project that you're going to be doing for the discussion boards. And the idea behind this is that you'll all be creating logical diagrams or physical diagrams, those kinds of things. And that should hopefully help you when you get to the comprehensive exam portion of your program. So that's why we do that. And hopefully we can all kind of learn from each other as we're going through this process. So read through the case for the network proposal. You can kind of read through that and get an idea of all the requirements for this particular case. If you have questions, you can certainly discuss it with the rest of your team. You can ask me questions, however you want to do that. I give you some details in there. You're certainly free to make reasonable assumptions. Just be sure and state those assumptions as you're doing things. So let's go on over here to the discussion board and drill down in that a little bit. So here's the very first discussion board. This very first part, I'm basically just giving you a little bit of background about what a logical diagram is. So it's an art and a science at the same time. There is a more of a scientific or methodical approach to creating a logical diagram. At the same time, there's an artistic flair to it. You can't just throw a bunch of icons on the screen and say you're done. There needs to be a little bit of flair to it and something that makes sense, flows, is aesthetically appealing, things like that. So that's kind of why I'm walking you through that, a little bit of that description right there. Here's a visual representation of what a pretty good logical diagram looks like. Are there better ones? Absolutely. Are there mistakes in this one? Absolutely. But in general, this is a pretty good one, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. Now, as far as the mechanics of the discussion board, those are going to be down here. And basically what I want you to do is I want you to have that very first post the Sunday before the discussion board is due. And that very first post is just a link to your rough draft of a logical diagram. So I don't expect it to be done. I don't expect the narrative that goes with it to be done. But you do need a rough draft that's up there so that you can see what your peers look like and they can see what your design looks like. Now, before Wednesday, the week in which the discussion board is due, I want you to have reviewed your peers' work and give them something meaningful to help them improve their project. So if you just say that it looks good, keep up the hard work, that's not going to suffice. It needs to be something more substantive, something that's really going to help them improve their understanding, their diagram, whatever it happens to be. At the same time, this is meant to be an engaging environment, so you can't just log in one day and make a bunch of posts. I need you to come back after Thursday, but before the due date, and do the same thing again. Either leave a post on somebody else's discussion board or respond to a comment that was left about your project. Either one will work. Again, it needs to be substantive. You can't just say because or that looks good. That won't count. It needs to be something more substantive. Finally, I also believe that self-reflection is extremely important in education. So on Sunday, the week in which the discussion board is due, I want you to come back and tell me what you learned basically out of this week. So answer these two questions. So basically just copy these two questions, create a post, and answer each one of these questions individually. So after the one, go ahead and hit enter and type out your answer. Same thing for after two. So tell me what you learned. Try to integrate some of the things that you've learned to this point to make a more comprehensive and robust design. Tell me about that. Compare and contrast the characteristics of the various designs that you looked at. So that's kind of the mechanics of what's going on. This video that I'm creating right here will be linked right here. And what constitutes a good logical diagram? Well, I've tried to lay that out for you right there. All of diagrams, figures, and tables and so on should have appropriate narrative describing in plain English what the diagram is trying to communicate. In other words, you can only communicate certain things in the diagram itself. You can't really explain how or why questions in your diagram, particularly why questions. So why did you segment your network in a particular way? Why did you use VLANs? What's the value of using VLANs? What's the value of segmenting your network? Those are questions you can really only start to address in the narrative. And so I'm not looking for a real technical explanation. I'm looking really for more um, of a business-oriented explanation of what's going on with your design. Why did you make some of those choices? What business needs are you achieving by those choices that you're making in your design? The technical aspects will really come out in the diagram itself. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. Start the diagram itself with a cloud in the top left. Typically, they're going to flow top left to bottom right. And I've seen some that look good that start from the top and work their way down, or from the left and work their way to the right. But in general, top left to bottom right. You need appropriate use of color. So colors work really well. Again, in the sample diagram, it looks like he's separating things out by different VLANs. So he's got green, blue, and purple. So you can use it to separate different subnets, different VLANs, different security zones, wireless versus wired. There's several different ways to do it, but certainly you can use color to help differentiate different areas of your network and convey information that way. But I'm not looking for color just for sake of using color. So it doesn't need to look like a rainbow. You need to have a consistent use of icons. So don't have a mix of two-dimensional and three-dimensional icons. If you choose two-dimensional, stay with two-dimensional, and vice versa. Same sizes, for example. If you've got a client machine represented more than once in your diagram, it should probably be the same size throughout your diagram. Recommended configuration information: IP addresses, gateways, DNS servers, etc. Do you need MAC addresses? Probably not. That should probably come out of there, and I'll edit that here in a little bit. A MAC address is a physical characteristic of your network. We're talking here in a logical diagram. We're talking about the logical constructs, the logical ideas that should be represented. So again, this is a physical construct, so don't include MAC addresses. You should also have a logical flow of the icons with limited overlapping lines. In other words, the lines shouldn't get too busy, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second too. So let's go back to the mechanics of it a little bit. When you click on that, you should be able to go into it and you see your different groups. So when you go to your group, click on your group and hit reply. Hit reply to this right here and create your post. So do that, change this to your last name. Type in logical diagram, create your link right there, paste your link, set it to open into a new window, and click insert. And then if you want to leave any other notes, feel free to go ahead and add those notes right there and click submit. So that's all you need to do to actually post your diagram. And then again, look at your peers, look at the other group members and see what they've done, the other people within your group. You should be able to look around and see that other people have posted. You can go take a look and see what they've done. You can also look at the other groups too, so take advantage of that. Something else I want to draw your attention to is this right up here, grading information. So if you click on that and then come over here, you can view the rubric. This is how you're going to be scored on this discussion board. So the very first one is that your initial post is in the form of a clickable link set to open into a Google Doc, not a PDF, not a Word doc, not a Visio file, but a Google Doc that's located in your shared Google folder. Your initial post of the rough draft is done on or before Sunday, in which the discussion board is due. You need to include appropriate narrative. What kind of narrative do you need? Well, narrative needs to talk about why you created the design the way that you did. What business needs is it fulfilling? Why did you segment it the way that you did? Why did you choose to use VLANs or not choose to use VLANs? What kind of logical topology are you using? What does that mean? So things like that. You really, I'm really looking for probably an absolute minimum of a half page, and probably closer to 1 to 1.5 pages. It really depends on how you write and things like that. It needs to flow. So again, largely from the top left to the bottom right. We already talked about colors, so using that to designate different VLANs, different subnets, things like that. Consistent and appropriate use of icons, so same size, colors, etc. Configuration information is included. Again, logical information in that network. And then again, the mechanics. So that very first one that's posted on or before Wednesday, from Thursday to Sunday, and then finally that reflective post due on Sunday. So the last thing I want to mention to you is the diagram itself. And I know it's small here in our sample here, but let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. So basically your cloud's up here in the top left. I'm not a huge fan of including gateways or wireless or excuse me, cable modems, all those DSL modems, those kinds of things, unless you own that equipment. If you own that equipment, you have the responsibility of maintaining that equipment. So you need to know more about it. You need to be able to actually manage it. So if you don't have that responsibility, skip that and simply go to your router. Your router is a device that connects two different networks. So because it connects two different networks, it's going to have internal and external configuration information. So an IP address externally and IP addresses internally. So I want you to include that information on both sides. If you're going to be splitting it up into different VLANs, then you're going to have more than one IP address internally. So those are the kind of things that you need to consider. If you've only got one IP address, if it's not supporting VLANs, and you need to segment, you're going to need more than one router. So there's different ways to design your network. You can see here that they broke things up into different VLANs. They had an internal one, trusted wireless, and I can't read some other kind of wireless here. I guess untrusted wireless. So I like the way that this user used color. If you notice, all the icons are three-dimensional icons. The use of color was really nice. They did include a MAC address, which is kind of hard to see here, but they did include MAC addresses. That's something you probably don't need to worry about. But they also included the IP addresses and whether or not things are set dynamically or what have you. If they were a wired connection, notice that they're solid wires and they use the same color coding for that group of devices. Over here, they used dash lines to indicate wireless. Now, I've got to tell you myself, I'm not a big fan of that, and I'll tell you why. I think it clutters the diagram. I think there's an opportunity to reduce the clutter by taking this icon here, this color, and instead of using these connections, these dotted lines for connections, use a small wireless symbol. You can get one off the internet, you can get them in Visio, you can paste them in there, and change it to the same color. So if it was this device right here, change it to the same blue, but then make it really small and set it right there next to that device, and another one next to that device, and another one next to that device, or maybe it's on this side. Doesn't really matter. But then now you're indicating wireless connectivity. You can get rid of these lines right here, and now you've helped to reduce the clutter of the diagram. So there is a need, again, for it to be not only functional, but also somewhat aesthetic. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. I really wanted to talk to you about logical diagrams. It's the first assignment. Students a lot of times struggle with that. And it really starts to tell me, especially when I start seeing these IP addresses, the way you've done it and the way you explain it in your narrative, it starts to tell me how much you do and how much you don't understand. So I really enjoy this part of it. It's developing your ability to think about networks logically. So I think it's a neat assignment. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take care.